Before we start, I'd like to say a massive thank you to the sponsors of this session, which is Disney+. As we all know, CMC depends on these sponsors to be able to put on such a great conference, so we thank you so much for supporting this session. So thank you, Disney+, for supporting the session. Great panel. I'll introduce them a little bit in a moment. But today, obviously, we're talking about sports wins. Hopefully, it's a little bit of a premonition for the game tonight. But yeah, if we can go on to the next slide, please. Or is it me in control? There we go. It seems like a really obvious thing to say, but sports is obviously very beneficial for children. It has lots of enormous benefits for them, from developing their gross motor skills and their fine motor skills, building leadership, building confidence, developing self-esteem, improving mental health, helping reduce anxiety, team skills, social skills. The list is almost endless as far as the great things that sport does for children who participate in sport. But sport isn't just about participation. Sport is also about watching. Research that we've done shows that the number one reason how children support the fandom of their sports is by watching content. So children love to watch content. And it's also very beneficial. It really helps them with developing a strategic mindset. It helps build resilience. It helps build social connections. It gives them a sense of belonging. Being part of that fandom is really important for them. It helps them. It also can help them sit through 90 minutes of really, really boring football and then horrifically terrifying 10 minutes at the end. So watching sport is also very beneficial. And there's a real connection between the two. And again, the research that we did at the beginning of the year, we interviewed about 4,500 children, so a really big global study that was across 7 markets: UK, Spain, Germany, Italy, France, Singapore, both quant and qual. And we really looked at what drives fandom in the world of sports, how we can increase participation in the world of sports, and more specifically, how can we narrow that gender gap, because as we know, and we'll come on to it later, the difference between boys' engagement and girls' engagement in sport is still quite vastly different. And we worked with lots of incredible partners as well to really help us understand it. So this research showed us lots of things, and one of the things that it showed us was the value and importance of sports content. Participation and watching sports content go hand in hand with each other. You play the sport, you then watch some more of the sport, which means you then play more of the sport, and so that cycle continues. So I think we can probably all agree that watching sport and playing sport are both hugely, hugely important to children. So in many respects, we have an ethical and a moral responsibility as content creators to create incredible sports content. We also know that it's not like we're trying to force feed this down children's throats. They love sports content as well. 85% of tweens watch sports content on a weekly basis across 4.7 different platforms. So they watch it across many, many different platforms. And about 23% watch it daily. So again, kids love sports. They love watching sports. Creating sports content is hugely important and hugely valuable, and it's ready. So hopefully what we're here today to talk about is what are those opportunities? Where can we really lean into sports? Where can we really create great sporting content? What are those opportunities, and what can sports do in the world of children's content to create amazing opportunities? So joined by an incredible panel today, genuinely exactly who we need here in this room to explain exactly what's going on in the world of sports. Starting off with Emma Middleton, journalist for over 4 years now, started off in TalkSport and then moved into more social media storytelling with the news movement. Has a great TikTok channel that I highly recommend everyone follow. That's Emma_mid, which is a dedicated sports that looks at women's sports and explaining women's sports. Again, really recommend it. Really, really good channel. We've got Sam Talbot with us, BAFTA and Emmy-nominated creative director and co-founder of Strike. Strike are a full-service creative studio making content for young sports fans, including the legendary Jamie Johnson FC, as well as others. And that Jamie Johnson, the Jamie Johnson universe has had over 100 episodes made now. And we're going to hear much more about that later. We have Jo Redfern, independent media consultant, who's applied her incredible wisdom to a number of organisations, from BBC Sports through Disney, through the WWE, and more recently, Jo's been focusing a lot on the world of Roblox and YouTube's and how brands can leverage those environments and really increase their kind of footprints across those environments. Again, Jo is one of the most prolific voices in our industry across both LinkedIn as well as her incredible podcast, which again, I will shamelessly plug as well. Awesome podcast. And then last but by no means least, Christopher O'Reilly. Chris here is the co-founder and chief creative officer at Nexus Studios, which is an award-winning, Oscar-nominated global studio in film and animation shows, as well as experience design, and really pioneers a lot of really cool, groundbreaking sports content for a lot of different leagues across the NBA, MLB, NFL, and other places, and has got some cool stuff in AR as well. So, first question I have is, how have we seen sports content change over the years? And I'm going to come to you first, if I can, Sam.
Yeah, I mean, for us, it's really interesting because I first picked up the book, which was Jamie Johnson 10 years ago. So we've been sort of making this show for almost sort of 8 to 10 years. And if I had to pinpoint 2 things, I would say, if I'm looking at it through the lens of football, to start off with, the popularity of football, how football has just exploded across all different streams of content, whether it's players as brands, whether it's clubs, everything around the game. Now we're witnessing podcasts, they're on TV, and then it's a complete massive, it's almost like a vortex of content around football. And the other thing that connects that is engagement. We make a drama, we make 28-minute episodes, but the thing that we've seen, and I'm sure many of you have been to many speeches here and talks about it, is just how our audience engages. They watch the episode, but they clip it out and they put it on TikTok. They own it. They connect to what you're doing. But just like a footballer is now a brand and is his own channel, just like a football club will have its own channel as well, you're almost thinking of everything as a whole. So when I think of sports content, I think of you make something, but you're making everything at the same time.
Jo, how have you seen sports change over the years?
I think the way that, as Sam said, kids consume sport content has changed. So they engage with it in a very different way, and they consume sports content in a very different way to previous generations, so their parents and their grandparents. That in itself kind of necessitates sport to change also, given that they've got many more platforms on which to consume it. And we've seen sports evolve, like T20 cricket, for example. You've got golf. There's stadium golf being developed by some of the big golfers that's going to use, they're going to drive virtually, but then they're going to finish off the putts in the stadium. So this kind of almost merging together entertainment and sport, because that's the way that young people consume sport. So that's certainly something that I've picked up working in and around kids media in the last few years. And also how they show their fandoms has changed, given that mainly kids consume content through their phones. It's 6 inches away from their face. They watch YouTubers, that they have a very personal relationship with YouTubers. That has translated into relationships with very often athletes and players first rather than club first. And their fandom, Halo fandoms will then emerge because they might then follow Messi from Barcelona to PSG or wherever these players go on to. They then go from being a Barcelona fan, they start watching PSG scores and following them. So we see these halo fandoms that are very different to the fandoms that their parents and their grandparents would have had. So I think the two feed one another. I think sport will evolve because young people engage and consume it in a different way, and they kind of serve one another.
And it's not always linear. I think that's the key. So when you talk about those feeds, so many young kids are huge fans of Ronaldo. They've never seen Ronaldo play, really, in like Man United or his heyday at Real Madrid, but they see clips. They talk about moments that happened 20 years ago. So I think, as we'll all find out, the feed is happening, and it's all happening at different times. I think that's really, really interesting now.
The research that we did, we asked children in those 7 countries which is their favourite player. And number 1, number 2, every single market was Messi and Ronaldo.
It's incredible.
In the US, I can understand why Messi would be number one because he's gone there into big fanfare. But for example, Ronaldo doesn't play in any of those countries that we spoke to. He's obviously now in Dubai, but has billions and billions of impressions across TikTok, and that's what's driving some of those engagements.
It's like they want the experience as well. They want, like you said, the halo, the glow, the Sue celebration is everywhere. It's on every playground. You hear kids everywhere doing that when they score goals at like 6, 7. Yeah. So it's happening in front of us.
And the shift, obviously, from the clubs to the players, as well as you were mentioning, Joe, is super interesting. And again, we see that from the research that we did in the US, they're much more transient. They'll follow the player, whereas some of those markets like Spain and Italy, where they're much more kind of club orientated, then they'll have a much more of a kind of a club orientation.
And I also think that's we'll speak about this later when we come on to the women's game, but I think that's very interesting when we come to conversation about women's sport, because that's an opportunity now when you're seeing women's football clubs, as an example, trying to grow now. They can really capture that, but Mary Earps is brilliant on TikTok, and I want to follow her more. And now she's moved to France, and everyone knows about that, and I'm sure young girls know about that too. They would not have known about it. They're just following Man United as well. But yeah, we'll talk about women's sport later.
Why is sport such a rich seam of content? So, as I mentioned up top, it is the basis for so many documentaries, particularly in the adult world. And, obviously really interested to see how that might shift into the kids' world. But, both from the live sports game, from the, documentaries, even like comedies with things like Ted Lasso, all of these areas, it's such a rich seam of content. Emma, talk to me a little bit about why you think sports has that thing that makes it such an amazing well to keep going back to.
It's interesting because when Maurice first sent me this question, I was thinking, well, I'm obviously very biased because I flipping love sport. Sport's my life. I do sport all the time. And all of us sat here are going to be like, well, obviously sport's a great content. I really had to think about why, because it's not really helpful for me to just say it's a fantastic thing to watch. One thing I would say is that sport is a way of getting to so many other topics in society. It's got to intersect everything. And I was speaking to Joe before we came on this panel, and if you actually think about sport and society, you can actually talk about the two in most contexts. And that's what a lot of my work does at the news movement, because I don't report on, City beat United 2-1. I don't report on, who were the penalty takers in last week's England game. But I will try and find a way of telling young audiences what they can learn from sport in a different guise. So where's the intersect with representation? Where's the intersect with equality? Where's the intersect, even is there a news story around sport that we can tell through sport? Because sport's exciting, but there's so much more to it than just the raw kind of at face value that it offers. I think the other thing why it's so brilliant and why producers will keep coming back to it is just it's so exciting. And I think even to going back to those penalties last week, even if you don't follow football at all, you will have felt some emotion with the players. And I think that's what's really exciting when we're also thinking about kids media, is because using that emotion can actually entice so many other audiences into sport that are not traditional fans. They can't recite who scored the winning goal in X year of X cup, because most of us can't. And so it's the emotion, I think, and it's the intersect of using different topics to get into sport, which is why producers should be so excited about it, for kids and also for adults as well.
Chris, obviously you guys at Nexus create a lot of awesome sports content. What makes it so useful for you, I guess?
Just to firstly say, a lot of my experience in sport, I was in America for 4 years. We have an LA office, and so a lot of my experience in sport has been with American sport, so with NBA, NFL, MLB, and often with the organizations themselves who are becoming, and I think this is a sort of theme we're seeing, they're becoming kind of substantial media studios in their own right. They're kind of like looking how they can take their story out themselves. And I don't know whether you're aware of the new NBA deal that's currently being negotiated, but it's quite telling in terms of the value of sport, because I think it's like 73 or 76 billion for 11 years of games. And now that's been bid on by 3 broadcasters and streamers who are going to take that. But that's despite the NBA declining, the viewership declining. And so, these broadcasters are paying more for less, 160% more for less games in declining viewership. plus it's 11-year deal, so they're thinking, kids are in the window of needing to become their viewers within the time frame of this deal alone, let alone the next deal. So why is sport seemingly viewership declining, but the value going up? And I think that's super telling. And to me, that's, I think, to do with how crucial the peaks of sport are. I don't think it's really to do with your weekly viewership. It's to do with how big the peaks of sports can be, and the peaks are absolutely enormous. So I think like one NBA playoff game on Peacock engendered 2.3 million new signings into that onto the Peacock, and 70% of them stayed. So I think that's the value of sport at the sort of biggest entertainment level, is that it's just we are increasingly in a kind of algorithmically divided set of subcultures. It's quite hard to find these huge shared stories. There's not that many of those around, and I think sport is probably the biggest of all the shared stories that we have. So I think that's why it's valuable to producers. I think what you talked about the values as well. I think you were touching on this too, but the social and teamwork. I think there's a lot of evidence about like how Gen Alpha are very attuned to issues of fairness and cheating, and sport is one place where maybe we see justice mostly, depending on the referee, and we see justice, and maybe there's not a lot of places where they see that right now, and so I think there's a kind of really powerful thing in that as well. So I think you're right. I mean, a lot of my experience in sport isn't sort of kids specific, but I think you're right. There's a lot of opportunity for more opportunity for kids into that space than maybe there's been taken right now.
And what about from a cultural perspective? Because obviously it brings the country together. Again, 8:00 tonight, I'd imagine there's going to be a lot of people in front of a TV screen, and kind of they're all coming together for a single cultural moment. And those things are quite few and far between, in the world that we live in from a disparate media perspective. Do you think that that in itself has an inherent value, i.e. the we as humans like to come together, or do you think that is a cynical broadcaster going, that's great, I get bumps in seats, I get eyeballs, where do you think is that a genuine human value, or is that just a great commercial opportunity?
I think it is. I mean, I was saying earlier, I'm a big Arsenal fan. So I go to Arsenal, I look around where I'm sitting, there's so many kids at the game with their parents. It's completely changed from a few years ago. More and more kids. It's like a rites of passage. It's a form of communication, and we'll talk about it later on, but it's a big part of how parents and kids connect. And there's very few sort of shared viewing experiences, whether you're at the live or whether you're on a game or whether you play FIFA with your dad or your mum and all this stuff. There's it connects. And I think that's where the opportunities are, especially for younger audiences when we know it's such a fractured market. So anything that can bring people together, I mean, you just see it with their kits, especially at the women's games as well. They sell more shirts at the women's game at Arsenal than the men's.
So bring people together. Obviously, sport as well is a kind of safe space for tribalism. So it can bring you apart, but in a way that there's nice rules. And I'm a Liverpool fan. He's an Arsenal fan, but we're
friends.
We're still friends. And I think
it's England at the moment. It doesn't count.
Beautiful.
Doesn't count.
It's absolutely beautiful.
So I think there is that sort of that safe space for tribalism. So even though it kind of brings people together, it's often in a kind of sort of paradoxically in conflict.
Emma, you were going to come in there.
I was just going to add to that, really, the overarching theme there is just belonging. I mean, I saw a tweet just before I came in. It was of a mum saying my son, is asking whether I can stay up to watch the game tonight, and I've told him he needs to go to bed before kick-off. What should I do? And I was actually thinking there of being like, I think I can tell you the answer to that. I was like, let him watch the game. She was like, is it worth the late night tonight? But I think going into school tomorrow morning, I don't know what age he is, but everyone will be talking about it. And again, even if you're not a football fan, if you've seen that game tonight and you go into school tomorrow, all the kids, they feel like it's a shared moment, especially obviously it's England, it's a national thing. But yeah, it's just that sense of belonging. No matter what club, you can still belong to that culture of sport, which is most of the time a very nice place to be.
What you were talking about there about those shared opportunities at live sports was quite interesting. So, when we asked the question about why do you like to go to live sporting events, kids would say spending time with my dad, mum, uncle, watching my favourite players, experiencing the win. And then there was one other big one. Can anyone guess what the other big reason why kids love going to sports events? What they
Snacks.
named? Food. Yeah. So many
Haribo.
kids were like literally like, it was great. I saw Saka score a goal, but the burgers, oh my days. So yeah.
Experience, that's it. It's the match day experience.
It was Bovril in my day.
Yeah. Cup of Bovril and a pie. From a making tips for authentic content, and this kind of flows a little bit from what Yolanda, from those who got to see the creative keynote yesterday, was talking very much about authenticity and humans and all that kind of stuff. Obviously, Jamie Johnson, and we've got here actually, do you want to intro the clip that we've got here?
Yeah, this is really exciting. So we're currently filming at the moment Series 3 of the spin-off Jamie Johnson FC, but this is the iPlayer promo for Series 2 that's coming out later this year.
The closer you get to turning pro, the harder it gets.
Play Mason! Play him!
Leaving Hawks was the best decision I've ever made. You're all just a bunch of cheats.
Training for the Premier League can't just be fun. You have to want it so much you're happy to sacrifice everything else.
We're going into 11 side this year. Things are going to get real. Bigger, better. Proper football.
Hey, no, stop it. Fine, but that disrespect is not happening again.
What are you doing?
I can make my arms longer. I only do it in emergency goalkeeping situations, like this one.
Yeah, right.
Let's go again.
To get us to the next level,
Whoa.
we need the right players.
Get back.
Leah looks like the real deal.
Got any advice for a newbie?
Try not to let the pressure get to you. You want to watch out? She could be a real threat.
Great execution, Leah.
Every year's a big step up. It's not going to be easy.
I know these players. I don't think bringing in this kid right now is a good idea.
In my experience, athletes respond well to being pushed out of their comfort zones.
We're playing our first 11-team game against top teams who have way more time to train than us.
I want this so much. What if I mess up? What if I choke?
I've been in the same situation, Christina. Felt the same pressure you're feeling. It's natural. Take a deep breath,
You can do it, Maxie.
focus, and commit.
My academy, my decisions. If I don't want you here, you're gone.
Everyone here is talented. Comes down to how much you want it. This isn't a game thing. This is serious.
Show me what it means to wear the whole shirt. Prove you deserve to be here.
Football, Eagles! It makes me feel alive!
Bring it in.
So talk to us about making authentic content.
What's quite amazing is a lot of those kids in there are in real academies, so they're real footballers. And I would say the first thing, in fact, to set it up, you've got to love it. It's got to be in your bones. You can't fake it. And I think that's anything you're trying to achieve, whether it's animation or documentary making. I was very lucky. I grew up in a sport household. My mum was a tennis coach. I saw life through sport, if you like. And with my brother, when we first sort of found the book, which was written by Dan Friedman, I knew on the first page we had to make this. Just knew it. It gave me the same feeling of like climbing into like your local, whatever, playing pitch and playing field and playing football. And I think the three pillars we would really say is, one, it's action. The action has to be real. The way you shoot it, the way you film it, it's got to be real. We do things where, as bits of that, it's free play. They're playing for real, and then we integrate the storytelling into that. The second part is talent. We cast footballers first, and then they become actors. Now, that's a really tough process. We street cast. We go do a lot on social. We've built up a real sort of stable over the years. Now they're coming into the show knowing it. But fundamentally, they are footballers. And you can just see it in the walk. You can see it in their vibe. And they have the aptitude to act. And also working with talent. So there's Leah Williamson, who's a complete superstar, who starts off this series. But our biggest story is that we had Jude Bellingham at the end of Series 7, and he had watched the show as a kid, and that's why he agreed to be in it, and that was an amazing experience. But again, you just litter it with some of these superstar cameos that the kids reflect to. And then I think The third thing is storytelling. And we often say they come for the football, but they stay for the drama. And we deal with a lot of really big, important social issues, whether it's racism, coming out, pressure, mental health. A big part of what we look at now in academy world is how kids get cut at 12. But I think they're sort of the main pillars we base it on, and from there comes authenticity. But the key bit is, as the people making it, whoever's involved, whether they like football or not, you just gotta feel it in your bones, I would say.
Emma, obviously, TikTok is all about authenticity. It's not a platform you can fake it till you make it, really. Talk to me through about your approach with how you make content, both on your own channels and the stuff you do with, obviously, News Movement.
Yeah, I think authentic is a really important word, particularly when it comes to TikTok, because, Gen Z obviously is the audience that I specialise in. They can see straight through if they know that you're not being authentic. And I think one of the words that sprung to mind when I hear authentic is raw, and obviously you see a lot of raw footage on TikTok that flies. You can call it UGC, but ultimately it's just people snapping this content if they're at games, taking you behind the scenes. But I think one of the examples that sprung to mind was the Lionesses at their World Cup camp last year, and seeing them in their training camp. There was pictures of them in the gym. There was pictures of Ella Toone making coffees with Alessia Russo's face on it in chocolate sprinkles, and all of those sorts of things cut through on social media. And again, as we spoke about earlier, it brings in audiences that wouldn't necessarily engage with football. And I think that's what's really great about social media, because you can use those raw, authentic clips of the reality of what's going on behind the sport to bring people in and go, oh, hang on, there's a Women's World Cup there. I should be following that. I should have a look at the game. And that's how you bring in particularly young audiences that way. To the point about making authentic content, obviously as a presenter on TikTok, I think it is, again, this is going to sound really cheesy, but it is about being yourself. It is about not overdoing it with, it doesn't need to be high production. TikTok space isn't like that. It doesn't want graphics of all sorts of kinds. It actually wants someone, Joe and I were talking about a creator that just films behind the wheel of a car, tells an amazing story. It's got a hook. You often have a learning curve from the hook, but ultimately you are getting the real person telling you a story. And also, if you keep it in a really simple way, feel like you're talking to the person behind the camera like you would in a pub. My editor's always saying, present it like you would be, nattering to a friend away. And the technical term is parasocial relationships. Mm-hmm. And you're trying to set up that relationship with the person you're speaking to behind the lens rather than put on a front. And the best creators on TikTok, not just in sports space, but in news space, are doing that really well.
If I might just add as well, a key part of making authentic sports content, not just us making it for kids, is also creating content that is a tool set then for kids to go on and create themselves, because they're all inherent creators. They've got the tools, they've got studios in their pockets. So actually part of making authentic sports content is making some content that you can then give to them for them to make it in their authentic way. Again, that's them showing their fandom. They become your marketing army. Who doesn't want that when you're trying to get a show or a brand away? So actually, it's not just us giving them authentic content, it's giving them and allowing them to use it as well.
And one thing I would add to that as well is if you go in the comments of some of my videos, sometimes I'll read, people will put questions in the comments and I'll think, for the News Movement and both my personal channel, and I'll think, oh, they're asking questions here, they want me to make a video on this, and I'll answer that. And some of the best creators out there, they're doing that really well. They're going in the comments, they're answering what people are asking about, and people there believe they're being listened to. And I think that's also really important, rather than you just trying to hit a message home and hope people will pick up what you're trying to say.
And there's room for everything. Obviously this is drama we were making, but there's room for all of this content. I don't think you can be snobbish about anything. I think everything connects. So, a lot of kids in our show, they're posting stuff themselves in terms of getting involved with us. So you just can't be snobbish about any of it. It's all part of the same ecosystem.
We found that the tweens, they almost split down the middle as far as, or not even, they're not split down the middle. They like equally official content and unofficial content. And 14% of US tweens are making their own UGC content and sticking it out there. So, that's back in the day, we talked about the Nielsen pyramid where 1% were creators and 10% were commenters and 90%. But now it's like 14% are creators. Like the number of people who are creating content is kind of going up and up and up and up, and they obviously are creating.
And it's also great to see in an age where social media often gets so put down as a no-go zone, and to see people get involved with the world of making content and make them feel involved, particularly in the sports world, that's a real positive of what social media has given for us.
Looking at live sports, so kids aren't watching live sports, or at least not as much as they used to. And you know, the very sensationalist statement of "is live sports dead," or is there a way to revive it for kids? But I guess the point is that it's not being consumed as much as it was for a number of reasons. It's not cutting through. You know, again, in our survey, only about 50% of kids were ever watching any form of live sports whatsoever. So that's down dramatically from where it was 20 years ago. Chris, I'm going to come to you. Like, live sports, what's happening there? Is this a journey? Is this a cycle? Where are we?
Yeah, I don't think this is a hunch, but I don't think that the story of sport is at threat. I think maybe there is a decline in that kind of, this generation, in that kind of, my generation had a very strong sense of appointment to view. You know, like, the thing was on TV, you're going to watch it, and then, like, we were, you know, that is just kind of in our nature of how we consumed content. I think it's much less so in that generation. They just expect to watch things when they want to watch them. And they watch them on the multiple platforms that they're on. So I think that is obviously going to drive that. I think in terms of how to revive it, I mean, the short answer is Taylor Swift.
She's the answer to every question, though, isn't she?
So, you know, if you look at the Super Bowl, just had its greatest ever TV ratings. It was particularly up amongst young demographics who tuned in. The games that Taylor Swift went to watch were the highest rated games throughout the season as well. So, and the serious point there is that kind of the sport needs to intertwine itself with the bigger, grander cultural conversation. And that's hard to manufacture. Obviously, you know, Taylor Swift's not going to date every leading sports celebrity. Yeah. But it has been manufactured. I think a really good example, again, from the NFL, I don't know whether you sort of caught on to what they were doing during this Super Bowl with Nickelodeon, where they did the SpongeBob live broadcast, which was super successful. So that was live sport, specifically live, because I know there's lots of areas where kids are watching sport. We're seeing that, those stats that you're showing is at the front. Kids still love sport, but the live things particularly, Nickelodeon, a really great show there where they had SpongeBob and Patrick Star kind of live animated, talking and commentating on the game. They had kind of broadcast augmented reality, kind of slime zones.
Gunge, yeah.
They had Finn Diesel. Did you see that they had Finn Diesel in the audience that they put in the audience?
And they had Dora the Explorer doing kind of explainers, you know, simplifying the rules of the game for a younger audience. And so I think there's ways, that to me is that cultural intertwining. It's basically finding a way to bring the kids into it in a way that was exciting to them through characters that they were ready to engage with. I think that, you know, for live sport needs to, you know, sport generally just needs to always be seen where it sits within that kind of broader cultural conversation and making more alliances, more collaborations. And I think that's a way that we can kind of really bring kids back into watching it live.
Being slightly devil's advocate there, though, is there an argument that the concept of sitting down and watching a live show for 4 hours, you know, particularly some of the longer sports that are happening in America, you know, and let's not even talk about 5-day international test cricket, you know, some of those longer sports, is that just, is that ship sailed? Like, you know what, that kids aren't watching that, and it doesn't matter how many bells and whistles you put on it, that's just not where they're after? Or do you think some of those bells and whistles have the opportunity to re-engage children in something that is fundamentally a little bit against how they're consuming content at the moment?
I think it can, but I think probably there's a degree of truth too that they're going to watch less longer sport. And in fact, some of the innovation in sport that has to happen isn't innovation in media, it's innovation in the game. I don't know whether you caught Djokovic talking about how tennis needs to innovate. Part of the problem is that paddle is the innovation. Like, paddle's like a faster, more sociable version of the game, and like in a sense that's a threat to tennis. And we've seen obviously within sports as well, like for example cricket and baseball, all looking at kind of shorter formats of the game to try and keep those attention. So some of it isn't really a kind of media issue. It's a kind of the fundamentals of how the story of sport is. Those stories of sports are told, and you're right, it's really hard. A 5-day story, that's a tough one to say.
But it's interesting because sports are brands in themselves. You talk about cricket, you look at the success of the 100, full of kids at the games. Do loads of stuff, live DJs. There's a lot of innovation going on in sport, the T20s, all that stuff. There's a lot happening. So I think each sport finds its own brand. The Premier League is an extraordinary brand. So they're all finding their way, and I think it then connects back to the kids because kids want to watch highlights. That's why you put on your Sky Go and you see the game in 2 minutes. You see, it's on YouTube. So I think things are always evolving. I think the fact they don't watch a whole match is not the end of the world. There's always other opportunities around it.
And back to your point about bringing generations together as well. I watched the NHL Big City Greens Classic, which is a Disney animated series. But every year, I think this year was the second year, they do an AR version of an NHL game. So I think this year it was the Bruins versus someone. But it's the players from Big City Greens are kind of superimposed onto the game, and then they cut to little cutaways, and it's the animated characters, and they've got little cutscenes, and then they go back to the game. And I followed along on Twitter, and there were parents going, my kid has never sat through an NHL game from start to finish, but they've been next to me this whole time. And arguably, I want to watch every game like this with, Big City Greens overlaid onto the NHL. So, that not only kept them together, it's kept them through the duration of the game, but to your point earlier, actually, it joined generations together again. So it depends what the objective is. Is the objective to get them sitting through that whole thing? Or actually, are there other objectives that you can hit with those kind of evolutions? And that's kind of that live sport event. It's that moment. Your kid sat on your knee getting engaged with hockey that you've loved as an adult, but actually they're engaging with it because it's their favourite cartoon characters that are being overlaid onto it.
I also think there's one step almost before we even get to the live sports where journalists or creators can step in a little bit. I'm just thinking back to last year, I did an Instagram series about the Women's World Cup. And I did daily drops of videos about, what's happened each day in the Women's World Cup. But before we even got to that tournament, we literally just did a video being, what is the Women's World Cup? Again, it's supposed to be for audiences that don't consume much women's football. They don't know who the big players are. They don't know when it's even going to start. And that video did really well because clearly people were just like, oh, it's a reminder, and it's also a real simplification. I think a lot of sports, I think particularly cricket, I think rugby's having a little bit of a problem with this as well, trying to bring in young audiences, and you don't actually know where to start with. I mean, some people might not even know what Test cricket is or when are the big internationals, and it's just helping young people, but also people that aren't into sport, just to understand what they should be following before we even get to the live game as well.
Talking of that kind of innovation side of things, by the way, has anyone seen Banana Ball here? You've got to watch Banana Ball. It's awesome. It's like a version of baseball. They've got people on stilts in the outfield and they all dance. It's just awesome. We wrote a blog on it. Check it out. It's very good. But talking of innovations, and actually I'm going to come back to you, Chris, because we've got a bit of a show reel here. Really interested to kind of hear some of your thoughts on some of the innovations that you are looking at from a sports content perspective. Obviously, some of the stuff there, cutting edge of technology and innovation in this space. Talk to us a little bit about what role do you think innovation plays within children's consumption of sport?
But specifically for innovation, I guess for kids, I think some of the areas I'm most excited about, I think real-time animation is crucial. I think that a lot of the things that we just talked about utilized the ability for animation to be live. And what's really important about that is it means that we can be part of a live sports show. We can have animated characters that are spontaneous and relevant and topical. And I think that's going to leverage a lot of interesting opportunities for, because there's no point doing sports in animation if it's going to take 6 months to make it. And the event, so even to be topical, let alone live, is really tough in animation. But now I think we could do that. So I think we'll then be able to see a lot more sort of fluid partnerships between the perceived traditional kids IP, which a big chunk of which is animated, and the world of sports. I think that's real-time technology is going to really drive that. So we're able to do now, you saw some bits there, like fully live shows in animation. We've done like hour-long live broadcasts on YouTube and on Twitch, and being able to take questions and using animated characters and be able to be completely conversant on kind of immediate social or topical issues. Kind of a little bit, another technology I think that's really exciting right now is the limb tracking data. So you're probably aware that this is quite sort of mostly there for adjudication, but Hawkeye and Second Spectrum and Bolt 6, and there's a few other companies there that are primarily there with these cameras there to for adjudication in tennis, like the line calls, or VAR in football. Almost all major sports have some version of that technology in place. As a kind of collateral, you actually get from that, you can take that same limb tracking data and kind of convert that into something similar to motion capture. And what we're then able to do, and we did a big pile of like a R&D project for Epic Games in this space using Unreal Engine. So we were able to take a game, take that data and render that as animated characters. So you saw in there's a stormtrooper. That stormtrooper is live rendered doing a move that a basketball player was doing on the pitch. So why do that? That's a good question.
Thank you.
What you can then do with that is you can take that sport and you can put it into Roblox or you can put it into Fortnite, and kids will be able to consume a live event in a game engine and see that from all the unique perspectives that will be afforded them because it's in a game engine. They could then use that to make their own content because it's playable. Effectively, you're creating a kind of malleable form of the game, and it can create kind of fantasy animation versions of it, or it can be hyper-real, photorealistic. That's a kind of creative decision, but you're basically giving them this whole new platform. And I think we're seeing that also in XR. So there's a lot of emphasis at the moment in XR about like how you can watch sport like what we call rectilinear, which is TV. Watch TV playing in front of you, but also in an augmented space, a kind of fan zone of your own, where you can kind of have extra data, see the game 3D in front of you, your own kind of stat screens, your own kind of bespoke memorabilia and content all around you. So there's these are kind of giving whole new formats for where sport can be shown. AI, obviously. Mm-hmm. We were talking about this before. AI is a little bit overhyped. We're using that anyway for a long time. It's kind of tool interwoven into many other tools. But it's definitely going to accelerate the fact that UGC can be incredibly superpowered. And the sports content that kids are going to be able to create is going to be transformational, and the influencers can create, and sports celebrities themselves, they're going to be powerful studios in their own right. I think that's going to be sort of transformative. But there's literally 100 other technologies I could mention. Like now our tech people used to say that they had to refresh their technical skills every 6 months. They say now at the pace, especially in the sort of AI real-time innovation space, it's virtually every 2 weeks. There's a new paper comes out. But most of it doesn't really add up to that much. You know, like you have to be, I'm quite skeptical of innovation. We do a lot of it, but I'm skeptical of it. And unless it's coupled with fan engagement, insight, and an entertainment mindset, it doesn't really go anywhere. So a lot of the time, part of what we're doing is like deciding that technology isn't that useful. You know, it's like vetting it for its use. And ultimately, really, innovation is only as useful as the extent to which it makes a fan's experience better. And that isn't always considered by every tech startup. So, I think, to me, innovation, we go in as sort of paradoxically enthusiasts, but skeptical.
Joe.
I was going to look at it from the other way around, given that Chris works with cutting-edge technology and how it innovates sports content, but we've also got technology that now is facilitating kids making their own sports content. So we spoke about that in a video terms before, but you look at Roblox as a low-code platform. It's very easy for a young person to go on Roblox and spin up some UGC of their own. And again, that's something that I observe daily. You go into Roblox and you go into the marketplace, and again, you go search Ja Morant or Caitlin Clark, and up come hundreds of UGC fan-made, unofficial jerseys, all different designs. So actually that's allowing them to innovate and create their own content too. It's not very difficult to spin up your own experience as a kid. It's drag and drop, low code creation. So again, that's shaping the future of kids sports content. And also, there's a huge experience on Roblox called Blade Ball, which is essentially dodgeball. It's massive, had billions of lifetime visits. The ICC for the World Cup of Cricket did an integration into that. So it was Cricket World Cup, but within the Blade Ball arena again. So it's kind of facilitating kind of the future of kids content, kind of how do you bring in new cricket fans that were fans of Blade Ball, but again, it will also give the ICC a huge amount of data as to which elements of that particular gameplay they really liked. Maybe again, that goes on and evolves the sport of cricket even further. So I think there's high-tech innovations that kind of go top-down that help creators create innovative sport content, but then there's also the tools of creation that kids are noodling about with themselves, and they're showing us what they want from the future of sports content.
I don't think anything's better than it. It's all part of the action of doing it eventually as well. You can talk about using some of those technologies to improve your sport. You can see kids play football, not because they've watched loads of FIFA, but they have other skills they're working on. I think if it can lead to some kind of action as well and physicality, I think that's really positive.
And leading on to the next question around multi-channel, so many of you have talked about almost the entire sports content ecosystem that exists around that live moment. So you've almost got in the middle of the donut, if you like, you've got that live thing, which is the Jeopardy and the totally unknown, and then everything else that spins out of that, from the Roblox and the YouTube videos to the kind of the commentary. So thinking about that kind of multi-channel stuff, what are the secrets about creating that multi-channel environment where you're not the live, but you are the kind of the periphery, the kind of conversations around that? I'm going to come to you first, Emma. Talk to me a little bit about what you do, obviously very much multi-channel.
Yeah, because when you put it like that, it almost seems a bit overwhelming, doesn't it? Because there's just so much. I think that's almost can be quite daunting. And I think, obviously, my experience is informed by my time in radio, which is obviously a very linear way of consuming things. So obviously, then my time in social media, which is a completely the opposite, and it's kind of absolutely chaotic way of consumption. And what exactly I mean by that is that when I was producing and cutting, audio of live games, putting that content out on radio, I knew it would be aired at 6 o'clock on a Friday evening. There was no question about that. I didn't have to think about the different treatments I could offer for people necessarily, because if you look at now on social media, when I post a video, someone could discover it in 3 weeks' time, and I have absolutely no control over that. So it has to go into your thought process of almost creating the content. I think the one big thing, and again, it might not be a secret, but the word native kind of comes up a lot in any conversations when you're talking about content. And that's because I think a lot of organisations go on this journey of trying to just sort of shove stuff on different platforms because they should be appearing on those platforms. But I think what was the statistic? I think native content on TikTok is 20 to 60% more likely to be shared, liked, and engaged with than if you're clipping up a TV package and just putting it on TikTok. And again, young people and Gen Z are very perceptive. They know if you've just shoehorned a piece of content on a platform that it doesn't fit there really. So I think it's about, I mean, again, I talk about TikTok a lot, but what's the trending sound? What's the trending hashtag? Are the Euros trendy at the moment? How can you tell a story about news through the Euros that might engage people that way? It's looking like you belong in the space, and also knowing your audience as well. And I think that's somewhere where, you know, we all have to hold ourselves accountable to, because we go out to produce not only something for a channel, but also for an audience as well. Do you want to jump in, Joe?
No, I was just going to build on that, because it's something that as kids media creators, whether it's sport or entertainment content, we increasingly now we do think about that multi-platform strategy, transmedia, social storytelling, whatever you want to call it, because you really need to think about the need state of your audience when they're on each of those platforms. When they're on TikTok, they want short bites of content, a little bit of information in snack-sized pieces. Maybe on YouTube, they want a deeper dive, they want a breakdown, they want to watch a video essay about something. Then they go on to Roblox, they want lean-in content, they want active, they want to mod stuff. So, you know, putting yourself as a producer in in that need state of what your audience is, and then creating and delivering to that, rather than, to your point, just cut and paste and just think you just stick it up on TikTok and it's going to work.
And there also can't be an expectation for people to move between the platforms as much as perhaps you think. And we've kind of gone on a journey with this at the Newsmint where, you know, we've put links in bios, we've expected people to maybe hop across to a longer version of a YouTube option. And again, lots of people will do that, but you can't almost assume that if you only put your key product on one channel that people will see it. It's almost, how are we going to do that on an Instagram? How are we going to do that on YouTube, so that the message gets out there, but you're not expecting people to follow through all this path to different platforms as well.
I mean, to be honest with you, it was, when we started making the show, this was at the very essence of what we did. We always saw it as multi-channel. Yes, it's a 28-minute episode, but we always saw the social, the other channels just as important. Even though we weren't even commissioned there organically, we knew as people who had to make this show, we have to meet the audience where they are. And you have to create, and this is the big thing, a brand. So part of building a brand as a show is you need to embrace everything. So a lot of our audience put their own clips on TikTok. They feel like they have ownership over it. And I think it's really fascinating now. You just kind of got to go everywhere and just go for it, you know? But going back to authenticity, be authentic. Do it from the right place. And like you said, they might find you here, they might find you there, but then they sense they're part of your journey. And I think going back to, we talked about sports being brands, I think that is kind of, the brand is used a lot, but that's the key. You've got to feel you're part of something. So tonight we watch England. So many different people will be watching us around the country, all for different reasons. And, you know, and I think that's a real thing, like England as well, as a football, has become a brand. And I think that's a big part of how we approach our show.
Chris?
It's a lot why we're so evangelical about the real-time stuff, because a really good case study for us in this, you referred to the donut, we call it the flower.
Okay.
But yeah, we work with the band Gorillaz. And we have the band, obviously they've always existed as these sort of as characters, but we now have a real-time version of all of those, of all of the characters. And that's at the heart of the flower, if you like, plus obviously the music and the broader story world that the band come up with for every kind of era. They have a really extensively well thought through story world. Then what we're doing is we have music videos, we have the live concerts on top of Times Square, we have Coachella, social media posts, a plethora of different platforms that we're delivering to. But the heart of that is consistent. But then how we're delivering to all those platforms utterly changes in each one. So the music videos are little punches into the story world. Like, I think the first music video we did was from the end of the story. So that got all the fans kind of like, what the heck's going on? They're in hospital, someone's died, they're all trying to figure it out. That's much higher production value. But the next day, we're able to go on TikTok and we do like 20 minutes of social media content a day. We can do 20 minutes of social media content a day with the band. So we've got Murdoch then on TikTok, and this has got a totally different vibe. It's really raw. It's just taken from him freestyling. We've read all the social media comments, and now we're reacting to that and being able to sort of stir the pot. And I think it's not just a transmedia strategy. It becomes and I think Emma, you touched on this. It becomes a dialogue. You're not putting out a piece of content that you dreamt up and here it is, and now consume that, and now consume that. We're in a kind of conversation with the fans. We're seeing what they're talking about and then able to respond to them, not necessarily how they'd expect, but you're in this kind of much more immediate dialogue. And so, yeah, I think that's one of the key things is to engender dialogue, not broadcast.
I mean, did anyone see the Ivan Toney sort of thing that England did? It was brilliant.
Yeah, it was brilliant.
So simple, but it gets shared, just like not looking at
Reading a
anything.
book.
But that's the thing that gets talked about. So they're responding to a big moment in a game, connecting it quite coolly behind the scenes, and you get to see them as normal people. And I think that's the connection, especially for kids. I think that's what's so important.
And I think also don't think that everyone will adapt to your content in those things. I think there's again, like I've seen this a lot with sort of Fortnite and Roblox activations. They're kind of brands and entities wanting to go into that space and expecting that the audience to do something that they never do in that space. That's just a recipe for failure. You have to see what they're doing, really understand what is their desired behaviour, and then adapt you to fit to them. If you don't do that, you kind of struggle, I think.
So, girls, we know that there's a discrepancy between how girls engage with football or with sport and fandom. I mean, we saw from our research that 60% of boys have a sporting role model where it's only 40% of girls. We saw the same numbers kind of replicated across participation and engagement and fandom and all of those areas. What can we do to get not only girls more interested in sport or engaged better in sport, but also get more people, both boys and girls, interested in female sport as well? Emma, obviously you've got a dedicated channel to the women's game, to women's sport. What should we be doing?
I mean, I think, obviously, when I set up my channel, it was very much it was a passion project for me, and I also believed in it. It was an important reason to get this conversation going. And on a really positive note, I think lots of media are doing this much better now in terms of targeting girls and women to try and get them into sport. But I think where we still need work is just creating these spaces where girls feel listened to. And I think there's a gap here for young girls in particular to feel listened to by the media, talking about the media specifically when it comes to talking about sport. And I know there's a really big conversation about, should women's sport be called women's sport, because that might cut off men and boys from the conversation. But I do think it has a brilliant part to play in, if girls go on Instagram and they're grading things and they see, there's a couple of really brilliant channels that I follow called the Female Athlete Project. There's Sporting Her. There's another one I can't remember off the top of my head, but their pages, again, they're just dedicated to women's sports news, global women's sports news. And obviously I follow them because I've already got an interest in it. But I think the broader message, rather than just the stories you see on those channels, is that there are people out there that are actually wanting, there's a space for you to feel heard about what you can do and what you can achieve as well. And it comes back to that conversation about role models. And if we get more girls watching sport, but also doing sport, the media does have a role to play in showing them that, there is the Sam Kerrs of the world that, when you watched that Women's World Cup last year, you were thinking, wow, she's actually super cool. She's not just a footballer, but she's actually a role model I can look up to in a lot of ways. The big caveat to kind of that conversation is that, again, as I mentioned, you don't want to cut off boys from that conversation. And I think sometimes when you talk about women's sport, it can be almost portrayed as it's just for women. And I think that's obviously something we've got to be really careful about. Obviously, while you've got to create that space for girls to feel listened to, it's about not disenfranchising boys from that conversation. How do you do that? I think it's also focusing on the broader themes and the intersects between the two. Ultimately, it's sport we're talking about. And the reason why we're giving women's sport a space is because we are trying to ensure that girls don't feel like this is only a space where, boys can belong. And I think it's finding those key themes between the two, showing that the Women's World Cup's just exciting as the Men's World Cup, and it's been the past couple of years, particularly since the Lionesses won that Euros, it's been fantastic, and there's been a huge uptake in girls getting to football. Particularly, I think other sports will be on that journey next. But I think that question of what happens next is that do we continue calling it women's sport? How does media captivate that male audience as well as the female audience, rather than separating that the tribes that we spoke of earlier? Because obviously that would be a bit of a disaster as well. So I think that's the key contention. But it's about creating those spaces where girls feel listened to, and that's what obviously I try to do on my channel. And it's difficult because I do get a lot of comments from quite angry men telling me there's absolutely no point about talking about women's sport, and then so I flick past those and just try and forget about it. But obviously I believe it, and I will keep doing it. But I think the big contention is that how do we don't disenfranchise men from that conversation next as well.
Joe, I'm being told violently to stop, but in kind of 20 seconds or less, particularly around Roblox, because I think that's quite interesting. And then we'll finish, I swear.
I'll say it very, very quickly. Yeah, Roblox for me, so Roblox has a much higher proportion of girl gamers on it than console gaming, which tends to be very male-dominated. Around 46% of users on Roblox are female, and there's 77 million daily active users on the platform. So for me, that's a huge opportunity to engage girls and women in sports across that platform. And again, given that they're inherent creators and sharers, again, giving them the tools of creation that then will go out and kind of spread the message.
Great, thank you. Sorry, well, I'm just finishing now. So thank you once again to Disney Plus for supporting this session. Please may you thank my amazing panellists. They've been awesome.